What time is it? What time is it? It's time for On Duty and the News. On Duty and the News. The only live news podcast about podcasting from the stage. On Duty and the News. On Duty and the News. The only live news podcast about podcasting from the stage.
Hey, on the stage, it's the only live news podcast about live podcasting recorded live. I've got a great guest joining me in studio, Todd Eury, Pharmacy Podcast Network, local native Pittsburgh. We got some Pittsburgh live news stories. Over the next half hour, 45 minutes, we're going to be talking about live podcasting, people doing live shows here in Pittsburgh, live shows part of podcast networks too, and hearing about what Todd's been building and just talking about how do we bring communities together? How do we have shows that inspire people? How do we have shows that motivate people? And I'm so excited to have you here. We met on a couple different events throughout here in Pittsburgh. And Todd, officially, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Jeff. This is so exciting to be here. You are a hero of the Pittsburgh podcast market, and I've been following you for over 5 years, and I was always, I guess, shy to reach out and connect with you. But when we did, you're one of the easiest people that I've met to get to know, and you're doing things in podcasting that is revolutionary, and it's kind of part of podcasting's history of Pittsburgh, and pharmacy's part of it.
Yeah.
I started the very first podcast in pharmacy back in, it was March 2nd of 2009.
Wow.
Goodness gracious.
Wow, you have the history of. You're like Sorgatron Media, Pharmacy Podcast Network. Fun fact: I did my first podcast in 2010, and I didn't know what an MP3 file was.
Me either.
I didn't know how to distribute an MP3 file. I used a blogging platform called TypePad.
Okay.
TypePad was like a paid WordPress service that said you can do podcasts, but all you could do was upload a file and just tell people to go there. There was no distribution. And I did like 6 episodes, and then my co-host got hired to be the marketing director for Ghirardelli Chocolates. So she didn't stick around to do that show.
There was no money in podcasting back then. There was no books called Podcasting for Dummies. Yeah. There was no. You had to figure it out all yourself. I used Blog Talk Radio. You had to dial an 800 number. You had to get your guest to dial an 800 number, and then they'd send you the MP3 like a day later. And it was like, and I was like, now what do I do with it?
Yeah, you get that great phone call quality audio.
Exactly. And then Libsyn was my very first podcast distribution platform. Shout out to Libsyn. They were also from Pittsburgh. Yeah. So I think there's heritage in what we know as specialty pharmacy, pharmacists that control treatments in rare disease. That started in Pittsburgh, and podcasting kind of really got its hold in Pittsburgh too.
Yeah, you've built quite a network. You're producing shows, you're running shows, you have shows on the network. Right. You're a host of some shows.
True.
Tell us a little bit more about how big is Pharmacy Podcast Network?
Yeah,
it's pretty substantial.
So we're globally listened to. We have 85,000 monthly listeners. There's a system out there called listener.com that measures podcasts' effectiveness through social media and interaction. We were the first to do press, and when I asked for my first press pass in 2016, initially they said no because they thought it was a joke, because podcasting back then wasn't really a big deal. And I kept at them. They gave me my press pass, and that organization called Cardinal Health. Cardinal Health is one of our nation's biggest wholesalers, drug wholesalers. They're still a network member. We have 42 shows on the network that cover things like pediatrics and senior care, rare disease, marketing for the pharmacy markets, like your independent community pharmacy. You have an independent community pharmacy right down the street from the studio. Then there's health system pharmacy, there's compounding pharmacy, there's our general combo shops that are like long-term care and community pharmacy. And what I've done is I've gone out and found champions of each of those themes to join the network and to put content out on a cyclical basis, but usually about one episode per month. And now we have listeners from all over the world that connect into. My strategy is two. It's a single RSS feed, which is Pharmacy Podcast Network. You get 100% of the content, and then for our paid clients, they get their own RSS feed. And then we, of course, combine those things in order to bring more listeners to their show, and then, of course, to the overall network. And it's been wonderful. So we've evolved from a podcast network, and now a public relations agency that's leading by podcasting. So that's called RXPR, which is we call that like our parent company. And what that's doing for podcasting, it's allowing us to center information with champions that understand whatever that is, whatever the sickness modality is or whatever. And then we put a lot of other things around it. We put press releases around it. We put blogging around it. We put social media around it. And yeah, it's finally a paying business. My wife doesn't have to say every year, what the hell are we getting out of this? You know, we're finally putting food on the table.
It's an expensive hobby as well. That's what I tell my wife about this theater.
It's true. It was up until 2019, we hardly made any money. And now I have a producer, I have our social media person, I have our project manager. So I have 3 total employees. We're bringing on a business development employee, so I have my 4th employee. And big organizations are finally reaching out to us saying, either A, how do we podcast? Instead of starting your own podcast and having 0 listeners, they immediately have an audience day one. Or number 2, do you want to come to our event? Do you want to cover the event as press? And by the way, shout out to all you podcasters listening. If you are in a vertical, if you're in some kind of realm, if you're tackling horse riding, or you're some hobbying organization, or you're guns and ammo, you should be attending conferences that are about that theme, and you should go as press and then get press credentials. That means you don't have to pay to actually go to this event, and then cover the event and use that as like some of your content.
Yeah, you spent 10 years, right, before you even got to something of profitability. And,
True.
And you're not just talking the talk, you were literally walking the walk. You told me when you got here, you just came back from a conference.
Yep.
You're heading out to another conference.
Boston. Yep.
You're networking, and you're making those connections with people who are already in the places that are interested in what you're talking about.
That's
so
true.
Go to where your audience is one of the best lessons, and do that repetition over and over.
Yep.
And all of a sudden, those things compound over the years, and you build something that's way bigger than just the idea you had.
Yeah.
You built this community, this network, and you're pulling all that vertical of pharmacy into one place, into one location.
Exactly. And that's just it. Like, if you put out a podcast about hyperlipidemia, blood disorder, or something, you're going to be in a space that who wants to listen to that? Unless you're a nerdy pharmacist or a doctor or a specialist. When people come to the Pharmacy Podcast Network, they know they can pick from between 5 and 6 shows per week that drill down into something extremely specific, something that's probably not getting enough attention. We have a weekly show called Twerks, TWIRX, that stands for This Week in Pharmacy. And that's our catch-all show. So that's a show that we use to test markets. I'll test subjects, I'll test themes, I'll test even hosts. And we bring them there, which is a nice way to say, hey, I don't want to just launch any podcast. Let me see if this person is good on the mic or understand what they're talking about. And then that's a launching pad in order to get to a permanent stage podcast.
Yeah, and that's what we're talking about. These types of things that you're building, you're at like 16, 17 years now from when you started to where you're at now. And the way that it's just, people don't understand how well that compounds and how important that networking is. You mentioned you could start a show about a very rare blood disorder.
Yep.
But the only people interested are people who have that disorder or know somebody with the disorder. Your pool of people was so small. But when you start to find people like-minded who are producing similar contents and you start grouping with them,
Yep.
that group gets a little bigger.
Exactly.
It gets a little bigger, reaches a little more people. And that's the power of having a network. And to have something like that, based from here in Pittsburgh is amazing. Like, I love that exists and that you're growing it year after year after year, and you did the time, right? You put in those efforts. You cut your teeth, a lot of people would say.
Yeah,
And-
one episode. I think we did. I was doing one episode per month, and then all of a sudden, like 2011, I started getting another show. In 2014, I got 2 more shows. 16, I had about 5 shows. We were right around 2,200 listeners per month, and then all of a sudden, the hockey stick happened. The explosive happened between 2019 and 2021, where we went. I think it was 15 times the listener. It was amazing to just see it growing. And now it gives us the ability to go out to brands and pharma companies like Novo Nordisk has been on the show. The FDA put out their own podcast. This is a funny story. They put out their own podcast that was information just for pharmacists, and it did not do well. They weren't getting any downloads. And they reached out to me on LinkedIn. I thought I was being punked, because they're like, hey, I'm the FDA. Would you publish our podcast? And I'm like, say less. Like, I can't believe you just said that. Yeah. And then they hired us to put out their podcast that was specifically designed to inform pharmacists about things that were happening. And that's just it. If you're a podcaster and you want that to become an income, you have to put your nose down and you have to decide, I'm going to do this over and over and over and keep refining. I'm here in your studio and I'm already picking up so many ideas of what we could change in my own personal studio. And that's just it. You have to network in order to grow, because you have to learn from other people. And then, of course, you have to apply your theme. Whatever your theme is, get yourself involved in the industry that you're part of.
And that's a lot of what we're going to be talking about in these stories. We have coins and sports and movies and actors and live shows. And, that's your playbook, is building the network in that vertical, integrating it with the communities, with those conferences, getting up on stages, being part of events, covering those events, positioning yourself within that industry to be the expert, to be the go-to source. And that's, I try to pair a lot of stories with a lot of the strategy that you're utilizing. And we're going to start with something pretty exciting: lithium batteries. Would you think that would be?
Do not put it on your carry-on.
And before we get real quick, it's Pharmacy Podcast Network. The website is Pharmacy Podcast Network.
It's pharmacypodcast.com.
Pharmacypodcast.com. We'll have the links in the show notes. We build a Paduty in the Crew page for each of our guests. Todd is going to get inducted into the Crew page right after this episode. So you hit Todd's bio, all the links to social media, links to the Pharmacy Podcast Network. They'll all be there, along with future shows that because Todd's coming back. I've already approved this.
Absolutely coming back.
So all those links on the Crew page. Check out Todd, connect with Todd, and let's get into our first story. We're talking lithium, sodium, and the race to power our future. It comes from the website Fully Charged. Our first story is a great example of just how specific a live podcast can get. At Latitude Festival 2026, the podcast was recorded live from the cosmic shambles forest of science and culture for an entire conversation about batteries. Host Helen Sersky was joined by Robert Llewellyn and battery chemist Professor Saiful Islam to talk about lithium, sodium-ion technology, 5-minute EV charging, battery-powered aircrafts, recycling, and even electric vehicles, and how they turn into power sources for the grid. While battery technology might not sound incredibly niche, there are entire communities, businesses, experts, and conferences and sponsors built around it. And I chose this story specifically because Todd built his network around the pharmacy industry. And here's the same thing happening with sodium-ion batteries. Who would have thought that there's an industry for that?
That's wild. But you think of the safety of the batteries, you think of the marketing of the batteries, you think of the connection of the batteries, and to put podcasting behind it, that means that whoever is involved in this could reach out to an organization and say, hey, we want you to be a guest on one of our shows, and now you've created an inroad for business development. And that's exactly how I use podcasting myself. It's always used to give a little crumb as bait so that you get an opportunity to market to them.
Yeah, and when you go to these conferences, that's my favorite saying is go where your audience is.
Yes.
And you're doing that when you were just in Florida, you're going to Boston. That's where the pharmaceutical industry is.
Yep.
You're there, and you're part of that. When you go to these conferences, do you try to get stage time? Do you try to get vendor time? What are some of your connection tactics?
So a couple different things. the primary thing that we do is we embed the pharmacy podcast into a vendor's booth, and we create a show for them that draws so much of the crowd because they know our brand and they know that organization. As an example, the NACDS is called the National Association of Chain Drugstores. It's all about chain pharmacy. So that's Walgreens and CVS and all the big organizations, but also the regionals. It's Giant Eagle that's out of Pittsburgh. It's Wise Pharmacy. It's all Ralph's Pharmacy. It's Publix. And they know us. So when they come to the vendor that is sponsoring us is called First Data Bank, and they're a data exchange company. So the data exchange company, it's boring in and of itself, but some of their technology is brilliant. We're bringing an audience to their booth. So they know that their booth is going to have high traffic. It's going to have interviews that's going to be about some of their partners, some of their customers. And then the Pharmacy Podcast Network gets to choose other things to talk about, but we bring it all to the same booth. So if you're listening and you're a podcaster and you're in a specific industry, you should be going to a couple different trade shows. I go to about 8 to 12, which my wife hates that. But if you even pick 2 a year, you should be going to trade shows that is about something that you're podcasting about. And I never have to pay to get into these conferences. I get press credentials. I bring attention to the NACDS as an association, but then I bring attention to my client, which is, of course, in this case, it's First Data Bank. It'll be in Boston. We'll be there Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. I'll be back Pittsburgh on Tuesday night, and then it's on to the next conference.
I love it. We've done 80 episodes of the show, and I've talked about that on so many of the episodes, that the fact that you're here telling us that you're going to conferences, you're working podcasting into the booths, into the sideshows, the secondary stages.
Yeah, it's a conference within a conference.
Yeah, I feel so validated.
Validated you.
Yeah. and that's what we're talking about. Go where your audience is, integrate yourself. The press pass we've talked about, it's a great strategy to get the foot in the door. Make those connections. Even your first time, volunteer.
Exactly.
Conferences need people to just guide people to, hey, where's my next session? Well, it's down this hall.
Yep.
If you want to, or you're checking in people, they need these people to help. And if you can get your foot in the door that way with the press pass, then you volunteer like, oh, could I do a show? Can I work with this vendor? Can I do something? And you just, over 2 or 3 or 4 years, that commitment, that engagement, that passion about the conference, they're going to want you there.
Yep.
And Todd's at a point where they're giving them passes.
Yeah, they do.
You're not paying to go anymore. They want you there.
I received 22 passes for 2026, and I've only used about 8 or 9 of them so far because I just don't have the time to go.
Yeah, that's the strategy. And Todd mentioned it doesn't have to be the same industry. Whatever you're into, if you're into rockets, if you're into music, what I do, podcasting. There's podcast events you can go to and start becoming part of that and be the fabric of that conference. Be a part of that and make those connections, because guess who's also there? The audience of people who like what you do.
True. Exactly.
So we'll go to our next story here. We're going to learn about podcasting. This was this is a fun one coming to us from, I think it was Jersey. Were we in New Jersey on this one?
Yeah, New Jersey is my least favorite state. You're not allowed to make any left turns.
No left turns. Or pump your own gas. What's up with that, Jersey? Yeah. Our second story takes us to, Amherst, Massachusetts. I'm not even close. I'm on the eastern seaboard, but where Amherst Media is bringing podcasters and potential podcasters together for its summer pod parlor at Amherst Coffee. The community features podcasters Amia Davoloshovia, Jamal Jackson, and Milan Clark discussing how they create their shows with topics ranging from Central Asian language and culture to local politics and music. But the bigger story here is community. Instead of asking people to discover these creators through an algorithm, Amherst Media is putting people with shared interests into the same room, giving them a chance to learn, ask questions, make connections, and potentially become creators themselves. And a good reason I chose this story, you have your own podcast theater. You mentioned you've gone through several iterations over the years, and I have this little theater. We're building these spaces to record podcasts, and this is a company that's doing it and then inviting the community in to do these live shows together, build this new form of media, learn how to podcast, and they're going to make connections. I'm sure they're a studio agency. Yep. They probably offer services, and they're building this around what they do, what they're passionate about. They're building their community.
And coffee too.
Yeah.
You had me at coffee.
I'm all in. And so if you have a space like that, or you're interested in building a space, here's a resource for you in your community. Go check it out. Go support these local business owners.
You know what's funny? You just gave me an idea. So in Fayette County, there is a bar and small restaurant that embeds a podcaster into their bar and restaurant. And I'm so sorry, I cannot remember what this gentleman's name is. He's an old guy. He's been podcasting for about 10 years. But that is a brilliant idea, Jeff. If you're listening right now and you're a podcaster, if there's local coffee shops in your area, if there's bars that you know the owner, you might want to say, hey, could I do a monthly podcast to bring you attention? And I'm going to use your environment, your coffee, maybe because at a coffee shops you have little musicians that'll show up with a guitar and they'll play. Well, why not set up a podcast and do like a live? Actually, you got my gears turning now. I think I might get me some coffee involved or something like that.
And that's exactly it. There's, you may not have a theater like this or like what Todd has, but there are remnant spaces in your town. I guarantee it. A coffee shop at 4:00 on a Tuesday isn't as busy as a Sunday morning.
Yep.
So if you can bring in 10 people, that's 10 more people than they were going to get.
Such a good idea.
Restaurants a lot of times have banquet rooms. They're not renting those out on the weekday or in the evenings on the weekday. Maybe during the day, maybe on the weekend. But that space sits empty.
Yep.
And that costs the restaurant money to have that space, whether they're using it or not. But if you can go to them and say, hey, on a Wednesday, I want to do a meetup. I'm in the construction industry. I have a construction podcast. I want to bring in other contractors, and we're just going to have a podcast. We'll get some drinks. We'll get some appetizers. And if it works out, let's do that again. You can get these spaces for pennies on a dollar, sometimes free, if you're going to bring them business. If you're going to partner with them, be a steward of the business, promote the business, bring them customers. That's a win-win all around, and you get a space to do this, and you might even get a free appetizer.
Exactly. It's such a good idea. Free coffee for me.
And now we got a couple of stories coming our way from the Pittsburgh area.
Pittsburgh.
This one is a coin one. So this is the coin vertical. If you collect coins, this is a Money Talks podcast, and guess where it's going to debut? At a conference. Episode 1 is going to come up on August 27th, and this is the strongest example yet of finding your niche and going directly where that audience already gathers. The American Numismatic Association is launching a new podcast called Worth Its Weight, dedicated entirely to coins, collecting numismatic history, scholarship, markets, and current events. But they're not launching it from a studio. The first episode will be recorded live on August 22nd at the World's Fair of Money in Pittsburgh.
Jeez. Right
on the convention Bourse floor. I learned Bourse I thought it was course, but Bourse is a floor for trading coins.
That's so cool.
I learned that.
This is brilliant.
And so that puts the podcast where? Right in the middle of collectors, dealers, researchers, auction houses, museums, and other people already passionate about this incredibly specific subject. If you want to launch a podcast about coins, what better way to do it than a room filled with people who love coins?
Jeff, it's a brilliant idea. Shout out to this organization and being able to launch their podcast. And the key is to just keep it going. But integrating this into this event, like you just said, your audience of who you want listening to this show is already showing up there. So that's branding. You might have a T-shirt. You might have some kind of giveaway. It's just perfect marketing and branding.
Yeah, and I promise you that if you go to a conference, and even if you only connect with 10 or 15 people, those 10 or 15 connections could equal maybe 500 downloads of a digital podcast.
True.
Those 500 people who download you digitally, you may never connect with, you may never know who they are, but those 15 people, I promise you from the conferences I've been to, they will be your friends at the next conference. The next time you meet up, they will give you a hug. They will remember when they met you. They will be an advocate for your show. You can't put a price on making those connections in real life, in person.
It's true.
And it's funny how you do have like these conference friends, and I'm sure you go to certain shows, you've met certain people, and every time you go there, you know that they're going to be there, and you go grab dinner and a drink or a special session together.
I'll be in line waiting for my pass or somewhere waiting to pick up some coffee or whatever, and I'll be talking to an associate, and someone will tap me on the shoulder and say, are you the podcast guy? Because I recognize your nasally voice. They don't say nasally voice, but I can't stand my voice. It's nasally. I've been podcasting for 17 years. I still can't stand my nasally voice. But you're absolutely right. It's the networking. You have to involve yourself in physical networking in order to help grow your show and what you're podcasting about. You have to involve those people that are in that sector or that industry.
Yeah, and there's nothing like it. There's nothing that beats face-to-face connections. You can do a social media post and get some likes and get some comments, but when you're there shaking hands, having one-on-one contact, having a one-on-one conversation, that is exponentially more valuable than anything you can do on social media. So those connections compound over time. When you go back next year, you see them again, guess what? They're going to introduce you to the 5 people they met.
Yep.
And then you're going to have, now you have 20 connections. And then all of a sudden you have 40. And people are tapping you on the shoulder when you're in line. You're the podcast guy.
Podcast. I'm always the podcast guy. I'm trying to get out. I painted myself into the podcast corner, and I'm actually trying to push my way out of the corner to try to be more public relation agency that just so happens to lead by podcasting. And by the way, that's another idea. If you are a serious podcaster and you have an audience and you have a niche, you need to start thinking of incorporating your blogs into it. You need to incorporate social media into it, and you definitely should think about press releases, where if you have a sponsor, you could pick up a press release, pay the extra money in order to get their messaging out, and now that becomes national news. Because if you go out to Google right now and go ahead and Google Pharmacy Podcast Network, go to the news section where all the press releases are, and you're going to see hundreds of press releases that have come from our network that was used as a news source, not just a podcast. So podcasting is another form of news. And just like Padooty News, I mean, this is news about podcasting, but if you're in a niche, use your podcast as a news source.
And a lot of podcasters talk about press releases. And if you don't want to give away any secrets, I'm going to ask you one. When you said that volume of services, do you have a service that you like to use that you find works best for podcasting press releases, or do you have a go-to strategy?
I'll bet you I'm using the wrong source. I bet you there's probably a press release source out there that is built for podcasting. Yeah. But I use Access Wire, which is like a little sister of PR Newswire, which is probably the biggest press release organization out there. And because they thought I was quote unquote cute, that I came to them as a podcast, I got a really super good rate that I get to like divide that expense out to my client base, so that if they have a press release about an upcoming conference or a new release of their product or something that they want a new client, then we're using that press release in order to drive attention to them, but it's always tied in also to their podcasting.
I'll be honest, that question was just for me.
Yeah. Well, I'm stealing secrets from you as I'm here in the studio too.
I'll write them down for you. You don't have to steal anything. And this another. We're a lot of Pittsburgh. I love when we have a guest in the studio. We got Plaxico Burris and Ryan Clark in this next one here.
Don't be a jagoff.
The Pivot Podcast hosts live show at the Paley Museum. This comes to us from New York. Our fourth story shows what can happen when a podcast audience becomes a real community. The Pivot Podcast, hosted by Ryan Clark, Fred Taylor, and Channing Crowder, recorded a live episode at the Paley Museum in New York City. The show started in 2022, so they built up those roots over 4 years and has since grown into an Emmy-nominated podcast with a loyal following. For the live recording, they brought back their very first guest, former NFL receiver and former Pittsburgh Steeler, Plaxico Burris, creating a full circle moment for both the hosts and their audience. But what stood out to me was how Ryan Clark opened the show. What did he do? He thanked people. He's wants to build on that community. He shared clips. He sent messages and supported them over the years. And that's what the audience relationship is about. It's something tangible. It's eye contact, handshakes, communications, and it's important to thank the listeners who helped build the show online. And guess what? Now they're sitting in the room with them. Where are they at? Face to face.
Yeah.
That's where the value is.
Yeah. Hey, I want to take a pause and give a shout out to my godson, Jelani Stafford, who is a defensive player with the Ottawa Red Blacks. He's a professional football player. This is his first season he's starting. I watched him on CBS Sports. I think it was just Thursday. They're 0-7. Wait, 0-8. So they're not doing that well. But he's doing amazing work. But the reason why I want to mention him is I've been telling him to podcast for like the last 2 or 3 years to start a show to talk with. Think of how many NCAA wannabe players are out there that want to go to the NFL or want to go to professional football. He could easily start a podcast about what that path was like. So, Jelani, I'm after you to start that podcast, buddy.
100% agree. We had a show booked that didn't go through, but the concept was the NIL, the name, image, the likeness that college players are allowed to license now. And what we're seeing is, okay, the probability of going from high school to college is small, and then from college to NFL is small. But the amount of kids in high school who have this vision, the amount of parents who've invested this time, they don't know anything about this. And there's horror stories of student athletes getting taken advantage of, and they sign away their likeness for the rest of their life. Or they make a deal that isn't favorable in 5 years or so. And so what he's doing on just being a pro on a, I don't know what the level, the tiers are for, semi-pro, I guess they would call it. He's gone through that journey, right? High school, college, and into the semi-pros, and knows what to look for, knows those pitfalls, and all those kids that are coming up, they need somebody they need to know that information too. So if he can start to share that, this is what day one at training camps like. This is what trying to get health insurance as an athlete's like. This is what conversations with your manager, your agent, all those things, sharing that, he'll have a huge following. Just given the behind the scenes, look behind the curtain, how the sausage is made.
Exactly. And the Canadian Football League is getting more and more popular, and it's growing. And I think every time that they add teams, it has to be added in twos. And I think they're even considering adding some new teams because of the popularity. But the Canadian Football League actually it's almost like the minor leagues in baseball, where the NFL picks up 100 players a season that they're pulling from the CFL. So it's not impossible that you might end up back in the NFL if you're in the CFL. But it's funny to read this and think that Plexico's back. If I were somebody that was like Plexico, that'd be another thing that I'd be doing on the side, is probably a podcast.
To run the metal detector, I think he's had some incidences with some handguns there. But they're living off of what they perform. I mean, amazing wide receiver, Plaxico Burress. When he was here for the Steelers, we loved that guy. And then he went on, and I don't know what happened with the contract negotiations. Things got a little ugly for a while. But Ryan Clark, Plaxico Burress, great time for the Steelers organization. Made that history, made that legacy. Now they have this asset. They can go on stage and talk about those days, talk about the NFL, and people are coming out to see it. It's only 4 years. They're Emmy nominated. They're filling little arenas. They're having a great time doing this thing with people. It's one of the best forms of live entertainment.
That is so cool.
Our next story, we're going to go in BBC Gangsters. And this is a live show. Our fifth story comes from the BBC Radio 5 Live, where the investigative podcast Gangster is returning for a 6-part series called The Story of the Milkman. Hosted by investigative journalist Livy Haydock, the series tells the story of Brian Brendan Wright and the 11-year effort to dismantle the international cocaine trafficking operation investigators said he controlled. The podcast brings together former customs officers, smugglers, cartel insiders, and people affected by the cocaine trade to reconstruct the investigation. Gangster has already attracted millions of downloads, but what caught my attention for this conversation with Todd is the format. Instead of creating a podcast that covers everything related to crime, Gangster has developed a recognizable specialty and can continually find new stories in the vertical.
I like that. The vertical is key, because when you become a source of information to something that less people are talking about, before the Pharmacy Podcast Network, 0 podcasts about pharmacy, but now I am splitting hairs inside pharmacy. We're talking about pediatrics. We're talking about senior care. We're talking about RX Tales, which is like the history of different things that have happened in podcasts, or I'm sorry, in pharmacy, like cocaine, for example, and the use of cocaine. And there used to be something called cocaine drops that you were supposed to give your babies that were teething. And it was like, oh, wonder why they're so laid back already.
Very effective.
It's very effective. But it's amazing to see what's happened to substances and things over the years. But this is really interesting. Shout out to the story of the Milkman and this overall Gangster returns, because every season they could drill down into specific vertical.
Yeah, so you give the baby cocaine, and it wakes up with the sniffles. You're like, your baby's sick.
Just give him some cocaine.
He's not sick. He's got cocaine.
Just give him some cocaine.
And again, these stories are. I chose different stories in different verticals that show people like this is happening all over the world. Like I said, I've done 80 some episodes of this podcast each week with 6 stories about people doing live podcasts at conferences, events, bars, restaurants, coffee shops, arenas. It's happening all over the world. This is one of the biggest untalked about forms of entertainment that's going on in the world, and it's kind of going completely under the radar. And Todd's obviously been doing it for a long time and going to those conferences, making those appearances, and it is now becoming a mainstream form of entertainment the same way comedy is with comedy clubs, music is with small theaters and venues. Podcasting is doing that, and it's doing it on a scale maybe even bigger than what comedy was in the 80s and 90s. It's coming fast, and it's really catching on in a way that I think most people are completely unaware of.
Yeah, we have 165 million podcast listeners just in America, and there's 335 million Americans, so that's more than half of people are listening to podcasts in the United States. But people want to listen to very specific things. So if you have a passion about something and it's just a hobby, and you've either started a podcast or you're thinking of starting a podcast, that can ripple and that can domino effect into a career for you based on how you position it. But you have to network and you have to connect and you have to think of creative ways of building that content, as well as getting your targeted listener to connect with you. And conferences, like I said, is amazing. But since being here with you, Jeff, I think the coffee shops and the bars and some of the events that are happening. Matter of fact, if you paid attention to your local community, go to the Better Business Bureaus or go to the Chamber of Commerce's and ask them, hey, what are the new businesses that have popped up in our community over the last, let's say, 90 days? Those are great. You call them, you say, hey, it's a special boutique that just came open. Maybe you podcast from a boutique, and it does. And I think it would really fit almost anything that you're doing, but it would definitely fit if you're talking about cosmetics or you're talking about accessory, or if it's a podcast that's made just for women or professionals or whatever. There's a connection to it.
One of the unsung heroes of the community that always falls through the cracks, libraries. Libraries have media centers. They have rooms for any kind of media for recording. Some libraries even have auditoriums and stages. And I'll tell you, in 2026, libraries would love to bring people in to become members, to check out books, to utilize the services. That's how they get funding. That's how more people pay attention to them. But they have the structure already built out. So don't discount your local libraries. Get your library card. And I guarantee you there's times when libraries have events. They bring in authors and speakers. Guess what? Authors and speakers are great guests for your podcast. So make those connections and don't roll out the library.
That's a really good idea. You just gave me another idea. Brownsville Community Library in Brownsville, Pennsylvania. I'm going to reach out to them and see if they want to do something.
There you go. We got our last story. It goes so fast. And I chose this one kind of representative of us. And not that we're failing in our startups, but we took a risk at some point, right? And this was from a conference called BetaKit, and the website BetaKit, and it came from Montreal, where the BetaKit podcast recorded a live episode asking a question every entrepreneur has to confront. What kills a startup? The conversation brought together founders and startup leaders to talk about failure, scaling companies, artificial intelligence, and the decisions that can determine whether a new venture survives. I wanted this story for Todd because there's another side to building a niche podcast that we haven't discussed yet, somebody has to take the risk and start it. Todd launched the Pharmacy Podcast Network in 2009 when, very risky, podcasting was still relatively new. I've taken a risk with this theater, and neither idea comes with a guarantee that it's going to work.
Sure.
Sometimes creating something new means willing to build the thing before you know whether or not the market is ready for it.
Yeah, this is a hard story to read and set up, because if I look back on the last 17 years, I think I've tried to sell the company probably 5 different times, because the consistency of sponsorships and revenue was all over the place. There were either times that I was so excited I was able to spend money for advertising and go to more conferences, and then there's been times over the last 17 years where my bank account has gone negative. So it's a risk. It's part of being an entrepreneur, but you have to find ways to align yourself in order to do something for some other organization that you're bringing value to them. So if you're, there's a podcast about the oil industry, and I'm part of a network that's all about podcast networks, and
It's very, very meta.
yeah, and I was like, how boring would that be? But this guy makes about $3 million a year podcasting about every little nick and cranny of what the oil industry is about. And I'm just like, holy crap, maybe I should get the hell out of pharmacy and jump into oil and go work for this guy. But it's just like, it's absolutely true that you have to not only show up and be consistent like you are, 80 episodes, congratulations on doing that, but you have to risk, but you also have to connect yourself to giving to a specific sector. You have to look at what you're interested in your podcast. If you want to make a business out of it, that is. If you just want to talk about weaving baskets and, weaving, jewelry, and you just want a podcast about, that's fine if it's a hobby. But I'm talking about the professional podcaster. If you want to make a business out of it, you have to give before you ever expect to get anything out of it.
Yeah, I think parallels that we have is you were probably very passionate about podcasting in 2009. You fell in love with the medium. True. You're like, I just like, I can edit this and produce it and release it to the world, and like I own this. And that started to build and compound, and you didn't go heavy investment. We've had stories where people invested $30,000 into a conference and they sold 20 tickets. Right? So this is very bootstrapped. I was telling Todd, like, almost everything in here came from MacBid, and I got chairs from a church for $2. Like,
they're such good chairs. I said to you when I walked in, I said these all came from a Catholic school, and guess what? It did. Like, they all look like they're from a church.
Yeah. I didn't buy this TV. It was a gift to my children for Christmas from Grandma, and I took it. Right? I bought like pipe and drape. I was very into bootstrapping. I stayed within my means to put this together, and I knew that if it didn't work out, I'm only out what I could afford to lose, and that was very important to getting this going. I didn't want to have a Benedum theater. I didn't want to have like a 600-seat theater that I couldn't afford. I needed time for this idea to breathe and grow, and I think that's very important. I think you took the time to make connections, build a community, and grow it over 10 years to that point where you got to in 2019. And I think I'm trying to do the same type of thing. Don't go bigger than I can. Right? I'm in a small town. I'm near the railroad tracks. You'll hear a train come by every once in a while. I'm next to a collapsing building right now, right?
It made national news.
Yeah. But that's important. Stay within your means. Don't get ahead of where you're at, and understand what you're building. Understand the direction, the North Star. Like, I've gone through, you mentioned, sometimes I feel like I'm the smartest guy in the world. I can't believe I built this. And then sometimes I'm like, what the heck am I doing? Yeah. I'm the dumbest person in the universe. Yeah. And sometimes that's in the same day or the same hour. You can go from the highest of highs to lowest of lows, and it just hits you. And sometimes it hurts, and sometimes that hit like propels you 50 feet, and you feel like you're on top of the world. And those ebbs and flows of business are just part of it. And you minimize it by not taking on too much of a risk. Yes, is this a hobby? Do I enjoy doing this? Yes. But I'm building things in the background. I've been planting seeds for 2 years that are going to make this something bigger than I'm even seeing it now. And I think that bootstrap is a very important strategy that stops startups from getting killed right away.
Yeah, I'm thinking of any conference that comes into the Pittsburgh market. Paduti could easily reach out to what conference is coming in and say, hey, how would you like to have a local podcaster help to cover this event in order to bring in additional recognition to the event? And then you turn around and find out what companies are coming in and then sell them sponsorship, sell them advertising.
Yeah, so you're taking some notes. I'm taking some notes. And, this has been so much fun. And this might be the best episode we've done so far. And I'm not just sugarcoating because you're sitting here right in front of me. Like, I don't ever go 48 minutes. I am a stickler.
Oh, I think we could keep going, but
I could go,
I don't know if listeners are going to listen.
And the value that you brought, the use coming here and saying the things that you've been doing, the importance of networking and building community.
It's huge.
The importance of going to those conferences. And, that's where you found sponsors. Right now, they're coming to you. You're the market leader. And you don't have to be in the pharmaceuticals or pharmacy industry. It could be golf. It could be macrame pants, right? You like to do whatever it is. Find that niche and go there. Go to where your audience is. Build up that network. Build those connections.
Yeah, and do it. But it's consistency. So if you have a podcast and you're starting it out, you need to commit to yourself. I like the once every 30-day podcast as a starting point. But if you're part of a bigger industry, put your foot on the gas pedal and get yourself involved. For example, if you are in the veterinarian business and you're supporting vets or you're selling products to vets or you're doing something, you should be reaching out to the national associations and giving your time away to them to bring their organization more time, just like you said with volunteering. And now it's putting you on the map. And you're doing that at events, or you're doing that at, when I go to these events, when I go to Boston, I leave on Sunday, my plane ticket, my hotel stay, my, meals and my expenses, I'm making sure that that's all built into the sponsorship fee so that technically I'm not spending money. And guess what? I'm marketing the Pharmacy Podcast Network while I'm there because people see me, they walk by, they're like, this guy's everywhere. And that's all I hear. I always hear that. People will go to a specialty conference about rare disease and they'll say, I see you here. And all of a sudden they show up at the community pharmacy event. They're like, here you are again. And I'm like, yeah, you have to pick a consistency. You have to pick getting out there in public. So if you're local to Pittsburgh, I want you to come to Paduti. I want you to reach out to Jeff and maybe get involved or I had to wait 2 months to get on your show. So you do have a long lineup, but networking, it's so important. It's so important to your lifeblood for podcasting.
Absolutely. Get out there, make those connections. And, the fact that you're getting paid to go promote your business, if that's not a mission, I think for people listening, like this is very possible. You are doing this right now where you've built up the network where they're bringing you to their events. And guess what? You get to talk about the Pharmacy Podcast Network. You get to make new connections. You get to shake hands and bring in new listeners while you're there. And you're exchanging this amazing value with your expertise, with your knowledge, with the people who are already there in the audience. And it compounds. Like there's no other way to explain it other than going out and doing it and just watching it go and grow and build year after year after year after year.
Yep.
And I'm just so honored to have you here and hear your story.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And shout out to the listeners. If you guys have mothers, grandmothers, fathers, aunts, uncles, friends that are dealing with medication errors, medication issues, you can't get things paid for, I want you to reach out to the Pharmacy Podcast Network because I know everybody. And I will help you get that solution. And I want to make that statement. I'm not making any money helping you. I'm just going to push you to the right because dealing with medication issues is one of America's worst things that people are going through, and they don't have enough help. If you're in Pennsylvania, by the way, reach out to the Pennsylvania Pharmacists Association because they have so many resources getting people answers. And the public doesn't know to reach out to the association, but the association is there to not only help our pharmacists and our physicians, but they're also there to help people.
Yeah, amazing. Definitely use Todd as a resource. All the links will be in the show notes. Pharmacy Podcast Network. I have one last question for you.
All right, let's do it. I hope it's about coffee.
No, that sounds more exciting. Do you know what time it is?
It's Pod Duty time.
What time is it?